Hello, hello. Okay, welcome to the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Duncan Chapple, and if I'm lucky, then you'll be able to see a PowerPoint slide at the moment. So, wave a hand or something if you can't see it. I'm going to go into the presentation mode, and then if I'm lucky, that means that you will see the main screen and not the little screen with my notes on. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just busk a little bit while people come into the call, just setting out the tasks that we've set ourselves with this webinar to give you an idea about what you're going to say, and then about what we're going to say, and then to go into the bulk of the presentation. Just to give you a rough sense of Microsoft Teams, in case you've not been in a Teams webinar before, it is set up with Q&A and with chat. My colleague Ian is going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A, and we'll be basically kind of intervening to draw attention to questions that need to be answered. If you are a Teams user, of course, everyone here is using Teams. If you're a Teams user with a Microsoft account, then at the end of this webinar, if I'm lucky, you should be able to go back and get the recording instantly. If not, we are recording this, so there'll be a recording available probably tomorrow, which I'll post on my YouTube channel, and we'll send out a newsletter to let people know where to find that. What I'm going to do now is just outline the agenda, just so you know that you're in the right place. So I'm Duncan Chapple. I and my colleague Ian Scott have put together this webinar. Rather unfortunately for Ian, he's just come home from some emergency dental surgery, which means that he's drugged up and has a mouthful of cotton balls at the moment. I'm not sure how active a role he'll be able to play in the webinar, but he'll do his best, and maybe we'll type into the chat, or maybe even painfully be able to make some noises, but we'll find that out. I'm going to be talking about Sage Circle. They are the co-sponsor of this webinar, the organizer of the webinar, but co-sponsor of the webinar together with the Association for Analyst Relations Partnership, which is the biggest LinkedIn group for people concerned with analyst relations. And then I'm going to be, here is Ian. Nice. And I'm going to be talking through these bottlenecks that we've seen in analyst relations programs, and then responding to your questions. Just to give you a little bit more of an idea about Ian and myself, we put together some slides that give an introduction. As I mentioned a little bit ago, Ian is literally just walked in through his front door from an emergency dental procedure. I know he's in the webinar, but I'm not really, Ian, I'm not really expecting you to speak unless you're brave enough to, but feel free to do that if you want to. I'm gonna say something about and Ian, also, if you are here as an administrator, then you might be able to see any people who are in the waiting room who are waiting to be allowed in. I might not be able to do that quickly and diligently myself. Just to give some context on Ian's background, Ian is a highly qualified market researcher who's been doing work on these sorts of questions for 24 years. So working with organizations that are what is now Korn Ferry, with the major UK organization for cancer research, with the company that used to be called Octopus Group. That's where Ian and I started working together in 2012, which is now called Publicis Pro. Then in pretty hardcore mainstream market research, qualitative based market research companies, NFP, and then Somehow. And then more or less continuously over the last 10 years, but more fully over the last 2 years, I guess, working with Sage Circle. Ian is one of the rare researchers who's able to really effectively combine quantitative and qualitative data, and to understand that in many studies, like our study of analysts, quantitative and qualitative data are very useful, but they tell you very different things. The quantitative data shows you what is happening, but they don't really explain why. And the qualitative data shows you why, but they may not really give you a very clear idea of exactly where you need to allocate your resources in order to make things happen differently. So the bulk of the presentation we're going to see today reflects Ian's work and genius, and I just have to do my best to present it. Just to introduce myself, in case there are people here who don't know me. So I'm also one of the partners here at Sage Circle. My background is working as an industry analyst. I've worked for most of the last 20 years, though, building specialized outsourced analyst relations teams to serve companies that either have analyst relations teams but want to outsource a part of what they're doing. Maybe they need help in Europe or help in a particular vertical market. And more recently, over the last 10 years or so, I've been involved with the University of Edinburgh, where I'm co-director of the Analyst Observatory. So the Analyst Observatory has, for most of the last 6 or 7 years, been the primary data collector for the Analyst Attitude Study and the Analyst Advocacy Studies, which I'm going to be talking about in a little while. And then earlier this year, I found myself working currently in 2 roles. Firstly, at Sage Circle, I'm a coach to analyst relations programs, especially helping them to use evaluation and metrics to reallocate their resources so they can really start to push the needle more effectively. And then at Signicat, I have a competitive insights role there. So I'm a Gartner seat holder, running inquiries with Gartner analysts, helping to better understand the market. Just to say a little bit about Sage Circle, which is the organizer of this webinar, the sponsor of it. We are an organization that was founded in 2000, so quite a long track record of working with a very large percentage of the largest vendors and service providers in B2B technology markets. So really focusing quite extensively on firms that are larger and have complex analyst relations programs where evaluation and more effective allocation of resources can really make a very big difference to help them to understand what they can do differently. Our mission is really focused around 3 ideas. Firstly, that we have to move beyond this idea of best practice. If I used to work at Deloitte for accountants, there are generally agreed practices for accounting. Everyone has to do those. Analyst relations does not have to be like that. Our organizations are different. We've got different stakeholders, different goals, different objectives. So that really means that there's no one best practice, and that it's possible to go beyond best practice. Best practice is what generally exists, but actually there's a next practice. There's a personal practice that works in your organization that doesn't have to work everywhere for it to be right for you. Secondly, a lot of the work that we're doing is around improving knowledge and skills. So we have an extensive bank of live and recorded training. We do diagnostic programs for clients where we help them to understand where their analyst relations program has got a bottleneck, where is it relatively strong and relatively weak. And then thirdly, a lot of the work that we're doing, almost all of the work that we're doing, starts with metrics, starts with evaluation, starts with measurement, but the purpose of it is to develop staff productivity. Increasingly, teams are trying to do more with less, or they're trying to do the same amount with much less. And so being able to widen bottlenecks is the most effective way to do that. It's a little bit like multiplication. 2 by 2 by 2 is 8, but 2 by 2 by 1 is only 4. So changing one variable can massively amplify the impact of all of the other things that you are doing. And then just before I move into the presentation itself, I just want to say something about Sage Circle and what we are working on at the moment. People who know the company know that really honestly, for most of the last 20 years, the Sage Score diagnostic, the Analyst Relations Team diagnostic device in various configurations has been the starting work of all of what we've been doing, and influencer mapping in different ways has been a very important part of what we're doing. Over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working at my previous firm, CC Group. Sage Circle was one of my clients, involving me in some of the work that goes into their studies, and influencer mapping is definitely an area where Sage Circle's doing some really industry leading stuff, not only looking at industry analysts, but other influencers, especially sourcing advisors and procurement advisors. And then the Analyst Advocacy Study, which we're talking about, and the spoken word audits, which are sometimes part of the Analyst Advocacy Study, but can be done independently. These are our core activities. We're going through some growth in our service provision over the first half of this year. We're developing coaching services for AR programs. Folk might have seen that we're starting mastermind groups. So these are peer learning programs that meet weekly for a 13-week period, where managers can talk about their challenges with similar people. This bank of live and recorded training has already been available for some time to people who are subscribers to Sage Circle services, but we'll be making more of that available on a pay-as-you-go basis. And together with the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh Business School, we'll be hosting an AR forum on June the 27th. So that will be an in-person event at the University of Edinburgh, but also a hybrid event so that we can get more participation and extend the audience. There are some other things that we are working on with proof of concept projects at the moment, and if any of these sound interesting, then get in touch. The Critical Briefing Accelerator is a project where if there's a really critical briefing, maybe a pitch for a Magic Quadrant or a Forrester Wave, we work with you around that. Membership programs are being relaunched. We do extensive customer research to help people to understand where they can move the needle with their analyst relations program. And then together with some colleagues who've worked at Gartner, we're starting an analyst contract support service. So this is aimed at organizations that are spending, probably less than $1 million on their analyst subscriptions, definitely less than 5 million on their analyst subscriptions, and just might not be sure that they're getting the best value for money out of their spend. So we're working with those folk on a relatively low initial fee, trying to help people to get the most out of their contracts. Okay, I'm going to get a sip of my coffee and then go through to really start talking about the study itself. These are slides, as I've said, that Ian has put together, but I think Ian will probably not be well enough to speak to them. So here's just a sample chart that we've grabbed out from the Analyst Attitude Survey. So the Analyst Advocacy Study is made up of 2 elements, right? There's the Analyst Attitude Survey, which is a quantitative survey, which has been done online since 2002. So that is really the only longitudinal study in the analyst relations space at the moment, but it's been the only one over the last 22 years as well. And then since Sage Circle took over the management of the study 5 or 6 years ago, we've woven into the Analyst Advocacy Study spoken word audits. So the quantitative study and the qualitative study added together is the Analyst Advocacy Study. Spoken word audits are also something that Sage Circle has been doing since 2001, so a very long time of following a specific protocol for interviewing analysts, finding out what they think about the vendors that they're working with, but really gearing it around particular scenarios and particular challenges. Much of my work for Sage Circle over the last 2 years really has been doing these spoken word audits. So I've been speaking with extensive numbers of analysts, and I've been assisted in this by colleagues in North America and in Asia Pacific. We've been putting together quantitative information and qualitative information that give us a picture of what is going on in the in the process of winning and developing analyst advocacy. This chart is one of my favorites. When we ask analysts how they feel about vendors, we ask them to score how likely they are to recommend each of these firms in the areas where they do business. And what analysts think about you basically moves them into one of three groups. There are people who are promoters of you. There are the advocates. You know, these are the people who have got well above average scores when they think about you. Then there are the people in the middle, the passives. You know, they think about you more or less averagely. You know, they see you as being a player in the market. They think you deserve to be where you are, but they're not really going to go out of their way to advocate for you. And then there are detractors. These are the people who think that you're not performing very well in the market and that clients will be better off working with somebody else, almost certainly, than working with you. And one of the most interesting things that we see there is that, I'm just going to put my phone on silent, sorry. One of the most interesting things that we see there is that there's a huge difference between how often you are in communication with the people who like you and how often you're in communication with the people who don't like you. And there's good news and bad news about that, right? So the promoters hear from you 3 times more than the detractors, and the passives are, you know, in the middle. They hear from you, not quite so often, but more than the detractors. But in a way, this kind of suggests that interaction itself solves a lot of the problems in analyst relations. If you were to reach out to the people who don't like you more often, probably they would be more favorable to you. And that's one of the clearest examples of why increasing the cadence of communication is such a powerful thing that analyst relations programs can do. When we put together the qualitative and quantitative insights from these two elements, from the Analyst Attitude Survey and the spoken word audit, what we see is that organizations are all quite different and how they build up advocacy is quite different. This chart here is one of my favorite charts that Ian has made. And this is a study that's been made for an organization which is a market leader. Yeah, so it's in a very strong position where, to be honest, its competitors are also leaders. Yeah, its competitors are also well-established, strong firms with excellent analyst relations programs, powerful competitors. And so if you look at this chart here, what it shows is that we've been able to use these data to produce 5 clusters, 5 different groups of analysts who've got 5 very different attitudes towards them. And just to talk through these clusters, this is just one company's experience. 7% of them are alienated. Yeah, they are just not very happy about this vendor. They're not in touch with this vendor very often. And then about 8% of them are distant. You know, I mean, they're not really alienated, but they're distant. The difference between being alienated and distant is what they hear about your customers. So that little cell down there at the bottom, customer mentions positive. If an analyst is alienated, what moves them to being distant is hearing about customer mentions. So there are lots of things that they could hear from you, lots and lots of things they could hear from this vendor, lots of things that we're measuring that could be better from this vendor. But there's one thing that is a key bottleneck, yeah, and that is customer mentions. They needed to solve customer mentions to move analysts closer. Then with these distant analysts, we looked at the difference between the ones who were distant and the ones who, you know, acknowledge this firm as being a market participant, but don't really advocate for it. And the difference between the distant ones and the acknowledged analysts is that they see this vendor as an industry leader. So the bottleneck there between moving from being distant to acknowledging you is seeing you as an industry leader. And then in the next cell, from acknowledged to engaged. So the engaged people, these are ones who are gonna, you know, they may not advocate for you to be at the top of the list, but they're certainly going to put you on a long list. The difference between the people in the acknowledged cell and the analyst in the engaged cell is that they experienced the AR team there as being proactive, and that they felt that this organization was gaining ground rather than losing ground. Yeah, so it had a positive market dynamic and also a positive proactive experience of analyst relations. And then when we looked at the people who moved from engaged to committed, the big difference there was responsiveness. Yeah, so analyst relations programs are often much more proactive than they are responsive. It's much easier for me to call you than it is for me to get you to call me, you know, and that's also the experience that analysts have. It's, you know, easy to get a vendor to send you emails when they've got an email to send, but hard for them to, you know, get back to you about something that you want. And then when we look at that top group of people, the ones who are committed, what characterizes the people who stay in that committed layer, who don't fall back down, is that trust is increasing, and that they think that the relationship with the analyst relations team is strong. So I wanted to show this firstly to give a concrete example to illustrate what this idea of bottlenecks means. Yeah, what we mean is that analysts are at different levels of maturity, and there's actually something that is stopping them from moving forward. Partly it is communication volume, but also what should the content of that communication be to allow them to move towards you as soon as possible. When we do this analysis for different companies, it's different, right? It's not always, the blocks aren't always, so the engagement cells are not always like this. The bottlenecks are not always the same. And what we've done is gone through a process of key driver analysis to look at, I think 50 vendors are tracked in the most recent version of the study, or at least we had data sufficiency for around 50 vendors. So what I'm going to be talking about are these key bottlenecks. I'm just going to talk about the generic bottlenecks that are applied to that you see in other factors, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. If I'm lucky, no one is going to ask me a question about how key driver analysis works. This will involve a little bit of a statistics course, but just to give you an idea about this notion of key drivers, again, what we're collecting are wide numbers of metrics from quantitative and also qualitative conversations can also be turned into metrics in a way. We see these cells of people, and then we're looking for this difference. So we're looking what is driving people forward from stage to stage. I am just going to take another sip of my coffee, and then I'm going to pause to the first of these, which is awareness. Absolutely, awareness is a fundamental barrier. Imagine these 50 firms. So we're asking analysts about basically the 50 biggest tech firms, the 50 firms that do the most outreach to industry analysts, the 50 firms that have the most analyst relations activity, the biggest analyst relations teams. Those are major organizations that should have a good idea of who is talking about them to their clients. And when we survey analysts, of course, we're aware that analysts interact with all sorts of vendors. We ask them to just focus on the 10 to 12 vendors that they spend the most time speaking about, the 10 to 12 vendors that they are most concerned about. And it would be nice to imagine that those analysts had good relationships, had a good cadence of communication, had adequate awareness of the vendors who are at the top of their pick list. Yeah, not all of them, but like the 10 vendors who you're focusing on the most, you would imagine that you would get some communication from them. But actually what we see, even in these top 50 programs, is that there are large numbers of analysts who are commenting on these top 50 firms, and the analyst relations teams are not regularly in contact with them. You know, they're not briefing them every quarter, they're not sending emails every month. Like even that basic level of cadence that you would look for, even with a tier 2 analyst, maybe, they're just not doing that. And that means that there is an awareness problem. You know, it means that there's, for almost every vendor, a substantial minority of analysts who feel ignored by the providers that they're commenting on and the vendors who they are speaking with their clients most about. So that is a key bottleneck, because again, I can speak from my own experience working on a project for a very large Sage Circle client, which is one of the biggest professional services companies in the world. Many of these analysts had absolutely accurate ideas of what that firm did 3 or 4 years ago. They felt that they were well informed, but actually the cadence of communication was too low to keep these analysts on track with what that company was doing now. And so that meant that analysts were not recommending it into some of the most interesting engagements, some of the areas where actually this company had made strategic investments to be able to move forward in that area, but many of the analysts just did not have up-to-date awareness of what that organization was doing. That was a substantial bottleneck, and it's one of the 5 most common bottlenecks when we look across these 50 programs. The second challenge is responsiveness. I've spoken about that earlier on, but what analysts have perceived is just much less proactive outreach. In fact, I spoke recently, oh, maybe I can't even mention him, but let me say this. You might know that there are a couple of software tools that are widely used by analyst relations managers to organize their outreach. And so I spoke recently with some people who are involved in the development of one of these solutions, and I was curious to know, what's happening to the volume of communication per client. So obviously their numbers of clients might go up and down, so you can't really do it as an aggregate. But generally their feeling was that many organizations seem to be organizing fewer briefings now than they were last year, and that last year they organized fewer briefings than they were the year before. And that kind of makes sense to me, certainly from my own experience at from my own experience, what I've seen and heard is that it's just harder and harder to get spokespeople to pony up the time to participate in analyst interactions, and also analysts are quite busy. You have to work a little bit harder, I feel, to get briefings with the analysts that you want. Maybe their schedules are a little bit fuller. You have to plan further ahead in order to get time with them. So it's hard to get time. And then, so the analysts have got less proactive communication, which means that they're more likely, when they reach out to you, they're more likely to have a really significant request that they need you to respond to sooner rather than later. And it's really the AR teams that drive this responsiveness. And if you're not responsive, it's not just inconvenient, it forces the analyst to go and collect that information from somewhere else more laboriously, but it also makes them feel kind of disrespected. Many analysts feel like they're just not taken seriously, and a bit suspicious. It makes them feel that maybe if you did provide them with information, that information would make them feel that you were not a company that should be high up for consideration. So responsiveness is super important. Analysts don't only want you to be reactive in the short term to requests, they want the AR team to remember what they've been speaking about, to know what the analyst is working on, and use that knowledge to act helpfully. As you move up, once you've got customer stories, once you've got awareness, once you've got market leadership, once you've got awareness, once you've got responsiveness, the next barrier is market leadership. There is not one kind of leadership, right? By being a market leader, I don't mean being a leader in a Magic Quadrant or a leader in a Forrester Wave, or that. I don't mean it that way. Leadership might be thought leadership. It might mean leading in market share. It might mean leading in execution. It might mean driving customer success. There are all sorts of things, but it means a position where the analysts want to follow you. Yeah. We talk a lot about thought leadership, but thought leadership means that there must be thought followership. Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they are, a lot of companies that I speak to, they're really not trying to be thought leaders with analysts. You know, they are listening to the analyst and trying to reflect back to that and showing that they comply with what the analysts say that people should be doing. But leadership means standing in front of the analyst. Leadership means being able to point to customer successes and say, these are our customers, these are our customer successes, our customers are the heroes. And we're privileged to be working with them at the leading edge of customer success. If the analysts can see your direction as one that they want to follow, that they think your clients want to follow, that your competitors should be following, then you can grow this market leadership. And so many organizations are not trying to really build leadership. You know, they're just trying to explain how their products and solutions are developing. That's a major bottleneck that prevents people from merely moving from being an established player in the pack to being a leader. The fourth major bottleneck that I see is trust, and it's a little bit sad to talk about that. But trust is a major deal breaker for analysts, and again with this breaking out of the pack. And I have to say, you know, sadly, it's very often more about subject matter experts and spokespeople than about analyst relations. Yeah, so I think generally AR people kind of like the AR managers who they're working with. But it's not always the same when it comes to spokespeople and subject matter experts. There are a number of issues that come up in conversations with analysts when we talk to them about trust. Trust is like one thing, but mistrust has many factors, right? One of the key things that definitely comes out is hype. Yeah, every organization wants to stand ahead of the market, but it's got to stand credibly ahead. It's got to stand as far ahead of the market as its most advanced clients are. If you stand further than that, then you might be so far away from the market that the analysts need a radio telescope to communicate with you. You know, too much hype makes you dislocated from the reality that they see in the market. And it confuses the analysts. You know, either it means that you're in a niche, you found a viable niche that is behaving differently from the rest of the market. That happens. Analysts are interested in that. They want to understand it. But if you are speaking in a way that doesn't make it sound like you're moving with the clients they're speaking to, and it doesn't sound like you found a defendable niche, then you can lose your legitimacy. Analysts want spokespeople who can paint a picture of the future and act as expert witnesses to their clients' current success. Not all spokespeople do that, and mistrust is hard to shift. Yeah, it can take years to shift an analyst forward from being in that kind of fourth step of the 5-layer staircase that they see you as being a market leader, they see you as being a market participant, but you just don't feel right to them. The final element that I would speak about is what customers say, right? Analysts are interacting with customers very differently. You can imagine some solutions are used by lots of people, and those solutions and many of the, and those users might be very well represented amongst their inquiry scheduling customer base. But then there might be other solutions that might be used by fewer people, and the people who use those solutions might not be very likely to have Gartner increase seats or Forrester increase seats. So in that situation, analysts might be more likely to refer to customer feedback, to use case studies intensively, to look at peer reviews. If you speak to analysts about peer reviews, I mean, that's a really good example. Analysts are all over the place, right? They differ massively in how they are using reviews, because some people are getting a lot of customer interaction. They feel like they've got a good feel for the market. Others are really interested in drilling down into particular market niches, maybe the mid-market, they might not interact there. If they see and hear customer frustrations, then it is really hard to be at the top of that list. And this is a particular challenge for these top 50 vendors that Sage Circle does so much work with, because you might be like 99% of the way to perfect, but there might be a few other firms that are also 99% of the way to perfect. So to be the most trusted firm, the one at the tip of the tongue, you might see that you are behaving very strongly. You might see that analysts are recommending you want to shortlist 100% of the time. But there's one firm that's winning. You know, it's a little bit like being an Olympian, right? Not every tech market is Olympians competing with other Olympians, right? Where in some markets you might not have to work that hard to beat your competitors. You might have a very diffuse market with a wide range of competitors, or you might be in a defensible niche. But if analysts are not hearing good things from you, from their customers, then that is a major obstacle that prevents leaders from being the leader. Okay, I'm gonna move forward now just to try to summarize some things. There were some questions that have been submitted, and I also want to pay some attention to some of the questions that have been submitted. And then, if I'm lucky, there might also be some questions that Ian will draw my attention to that have been submitted. But I want to try to draw these bottlenecks together. And when I talk through these 5 bottlenecks, I just want to repeat this point. These might not be your company's 5 bottlenecks. And even if they are, they might not be in this order. So we really need to look at the data and to understand that for different organizations, trust is more or less of an asset for them. For some organizations, customer stories might be more or less accessible for them. Awareness of your organization might be really very high and quite up to date, or it might be quite low, and the majority of analysts might be a little bit dislocated from the reality of your market. That's absolutely my experience working with this market leading services firm that every analyst follows in this market. Every analyst feels that they know about. But actually, the more I got into conversations with them, I understood that in the key growth platforms that this firm was focused on, there was actually very inaccurate awareness. So let me just step through these 5 again in summary. These are across all 50 programs. These are the 5 bottlenecks that are most present, and this is generally the area that they are in. So this I think is very useful, but very unlikely. It's like averages, right? It's very unlikely to, like the average phone number, right? That's the average phone number, but it's unlikely to dial your phone, right? But it is the average, even if it starts 555. You have awareness, right? Do the analysts know enough about you to be able to say something? And actually, is what they think about you in any way connected with who your company is? Responsiveness. When they submit an inquiry to you, well, firstly, have they just given up on submitting inquiries to you? There are so many major organizations that actually are getting almost no inbound inquiry from analysts because they've kind of given up. There's 1 or 2 firms that are at the tip of their tongue, and if they've got a question, they're going to go to those people who they know are going to respond. So the challenge about responsiveness is it's not just how often does it take you to respond to an inbound inquiry, but actually how many inbound inquiries are you getting from analysts? Because maybe you've disappointed them so consistently that they've given up on asking you. Do they see you as being a market leader? Yeah. And in particular, that means, are you in any way standing ahead of them, contributing to thought leadership, offering them an idea about where the market is moving forward? Trust. They probably trust you. If you're on this call, you're probably alert to outside threats, alert to what's going on in the environment. You're probably not the problem, but maybe your spokespeople are the problem. Maybe your subject matter experts are the problem. Maybe even just not being able to get them into conversations with analysts is a sign that there could be a trust problem on one side or the other. And then finally, what customers say. No organization is happy with its ability to maximize customer advocacy, but many firms are far behind where they need to be. A great test for this, if you're in a relatively complex business, is to look at Gartner Peer Insights. How many markets is Gartner collecting reviews from your customers in? And then how many of those market segments are you doing anything at all to communicate? I mean, I'd say when I do this analysis for clients, they are often shocked to see that there might be secondary or tertiary areas of their business where there are actually substantial numbers of users who are contributing reviews, and they're unaware of the fact that these users are shifting analysts' perceptions, and they just weren't aware of it. I want to move on now to questions, and if Ian is able to talk, then he's going to unmute and interrupt me with interesting questions. But what I'm going to do is actually move on to some of the questions that were submitted in advance. Not all of these questions are immediately relevant to what I've said, but they're all relevant to analyst relations bottlenecks in one way or the other. These are the questions that I had in advance, and I've mapped them to Ephraim Malek's ideal model. So people might know Ephraim Malek was, in the 1980s and 1990s, the preeminent analyst relations consultant. He'd led analyst relations at Honeywell. He went back into academia, but his book that you see here, Win Them Over, is in its 3rd edition. And this has been, over the last 30, 40 years, the best-selling book on analyst relations. And his ideal model, I think, is a very effective way of conceptualizing all of the tasks that analyst relations people have. So those 5 elements, those core competencies, are identifying the right elements, driving AR performance by having metrics that reflect business goals, engaging with analysts effectively, not just one-to-one, but one-to-many as well, aligning, so making sure that messaging and positioning is well aligned to the reality of what your company is doing and the messaging of what's going on, and then finally leverage, so taking everything that analysts have to say about your company, about your solution, about the problem that you're solving, and then circulating that, amplifying it to an audience that is wider than its organic audience. These 5 activities in the ideal model are really effective if you're thinking about bottlenecks, because if you think about what you're doing in these 5 areas, you're probably going to see that you're doing much more in some areas and much less in others. So it's a very useful toolkit in itself. And also on the subject of diagnostics, earlier on I mentioned Sage Circle's diagnostic, Sage Score. If you've not taken Sage Score and are interested in it, it's basically like a multiple choice online quiz that goes through 20 questions which align to the ideal model. If you'd like to take that, email Ian or I. My email is dc@sagecircle.com. Ian is ian@sagecircle.com. So email either of us if you're interested in getting a link so that you can take the diagnostic. It'll show you where your bottlenecks are and compare your skills against other firms that have taken the survey. Let me just step through some of these questions. I'll do it very quickly because of where we're at with time. Why is Forrester losing money? Obviously, this is a key question when it comes to understanding whether Forrester's revenues are falling or whether Forrester is less influential. I think clearly both of these are true, right? Forrester's revenues are declining. It is focusing on a core group of technology areas. It's closing down some technology areas. Fundamentally, Forrester is losing money because it is not growing its sales team. Because it's not growing its sales team, it can't grow its revenues, and because it can't grow its revenues, it can't maintain and grow its focus markets. So it is closing down coverage in a couple of areas and building out in other areas like generative AI. What role do AR team operations play in avoiding these bottlenecks? Well, I mean, they are absolutely key to focusing these bottlenecks. If we think about team operations, very often what large AR programs are doing is saying, right, there are these key analysts. We're going to have basically like key account managers, highly qualified AR people that are focusing on a small number of analysts. And then there's going to be an operations team who are going to be doing the other things, dealing with inbound inquiry, maybe from other analysts, doing one-to-many, doing newsletters, doing webinars, organizing events. That is really key. One of the things that I've been surprised by has been the exceptional engagement in one-to-many communication in programs that I worked on at CC Group, and a lot of the credit for that goes to Chris Sedgwick, who's got a background in content marketing, and use that very powerfully to develop a much wider range of quite operational techniques, admittedly, but it's absolutely obvious that there's real engagement driving out of these programs. So I'd say it's essential to get strong one-to-many communication and to make sure that you are mapping all of the analysts who are advising your analysts, not just the easy ones. In terms of gaining executive sponsorship, I think a key part of that, I've put it under Drive. Drive is all about having goals and metrics that align to business obligations and business objectives. And I think that is key, right? If you've got metrics, you can report upwards. If you report upwards, you get stakeholders who start to look at your metrics and they become concerned by them. And then if you have got metrics, suddenly you've got a stakeholder audience of people who are consuming them. You are accountable to them, but then they become accountable for giving you direction. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, AR programs often were set up with formal charters, with stakeholder boards, with internal advisory groups. They had sponsors. Now AR teams need to go out of their way to build sponsors, enroll sponsors, create sponsor boards. That is critical, I think, for developing it. And then leverage insights. Yeah, use these insights to activate your spokespeople, to reward spokespeople who've participated in interactions with analysts. Make there an upside for participating. And that is really also the answer to the other question about how do you deal with a group of disengaged leaders. I mean, one part of that, especially with mid-sized firms and smaller firms to a degree, but one part of that is just showing that analysts are influential. People might know about the Analyst Value Survey, which Sage Circle and the Analyst Observatory have cooperated on. This is another longitudinal study where every year hundreds of people who use analyst services say what they use analysts for and which analysts they use and how influential those firms are and how good the value for money is that they get from these firms. So actually, a lot of leaders in technology vendors and in solution providers are actually quite skeptical about analysts. They're skeptical that analysts are influential, and they think that analysts are pay to play. And those are largely myths. And you have to break them in order to produce motivation. But then the other thing is to take a kind of appreciative inquiry approach and to show that what the organization is doing in some situations is generating results. If you can show that there are results, that we know how to get good outcomes, good insights, good relationships, then we're able to generalize that, to spotlight best behavior, to reward people, and then to just open up the honey pot, and then that will attract, more bees towards us. On engagement, there's a really interesting question about how significant are market predictions in guiding product direction and development. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but personally, I'd say I'm super skeptical about that. I used to be an industry analyst. I've produced market forecasts, and for a long time, I've done market sizing of the analyst industry itself. Yeah, so for 500, 600 firms, I did sizing of these firms, looking at how their revenues were changing and in which areas firms were generating the most revenue. You should treat those numbers as seriously as weather forecasts or odds from the bookmaker on horse racing, but you can't really take it more seriously. Yeah. So I am personally skeptical about how significant these predictions are, but how predictions they are. But you can see that product managers love them, right? Everybody wants to know the total addressable market. And you can see that they're not always very concerned about getting very high quality metrics. They just want a number. They want the biggest number they can do often. Finally, on alignment, what are the best practices for not sending mixed messages? Well, this absolutely involves making sure that there is consistent corporate messaging and making sure that corporate messaging is supported by proof points from what the organization is actually delivering. Sometimes corporate messaging is highly aspirational and is not composed of proof points that come from what the business units and solutions are doing. Having that kind of message checking is really useful, and then combining it with these spoken word audits. Okay, we call them spoken word audits. They might be called something else in your organization, but that process of going out and having qualitative conversations that are geared around specific markets, specific technologies, specific use cases to see how markets and other influencers are talking about that is a very strong tool to ensure that there is alignment between the way that you are speaking about your company, the way that others perceive your market, the way that they perceive you, and the way that they conceive of your customer challenges. I'm going to pause now to look at the chat to see if there are any other questions that have come in our final few minutes. Before I do that, just a quick advert. Many of the people on this call will have been interviewed by one of two researchers from Bocconi Business School in Milan. So two researchers from Bocconi University, Prachi and Pooja, have been interviewing analyst relations managers. Prachi has been focusing more on very large firms, on these kind of top 50 powerhouse firms, and Pooja has been interviewing still very large firms, not really mid-market firms, but firms that are 1 billion, 5 billion, 8 billion, just like not above 10 billion, very large firms. And we're identifying the hurdles that these professionals perceive to have in their analyst relations practice. So what we've been doing is what Prachi and Pooja have been doing is speaking with these analysts. I'm hopeful that Chris Gurman, one of our board members and a founder of Sage Circle, will also join that panel. But click on bit.ly/AR hurdles or use the QR code to register for that. Okay, I'm going to stop presenting now so that I can see any questions that have come in. Excellent, good. There are some things in the chat that Ian says that I should take a look at. Great questions. So if I'm in the chat, you're in the chat, right? I think you can look at the chat as well. So that's a really interesting point from Dan. Dan, I mean, you will know better than me, and a part of that is, how do you define the difference between analyst relations and AR operations? So I've got a lot of experience at I've got a lot of experience with one particular client that basically did all the one-to-one with its top analysts through the core team, and then everything else was done by operations. And I think that only makes sense. That 5-to-1 ratio only makes sense if okay, so thanks, Dan, you've done that, but let me just finish on one definition of AR operations, which is your operations team is dealing with the one-to-many. So in that setting, you really have to say, of the analysts that we've got of the core analysts, how much analyst influence is held by our core analysts? What percentage of the analyst influence is held by our core analysts? For some vendors, the core analysts might have 80% of the influence, in which case 80% of the resource should go on those analysts. But the core analysts might influence only 20% of the market, in which case 20% of your effort should go on the core analysts, and the rest should go on the long tail, on the people you can't deal with in the core program. So AR operations absolutely is often equated with digital AR, one-to-many AR with that long tail. I'd say that people assume that analyst influence is much more concentrated than it really is. And when you look at so for example, Gartner, I speak all the time to people who think that most of the analyst influence in their market is held by Gartner. But when we look at the data from the Analyst Value Survey, in no market is that the case. Absolutely not. And especially people think that Gartner Inquiry is influencing most of their market, when Gartner Inquiry is at the most 8% of the analyst influence on their market. So comparing the data with the facts is extremely significant. But then if we think at other operational things, metrics, organizing events, managing vendors, internal communication, the one-to-many stuff, the portal, agency management, AR tooling, AR team processes, I mean, this is most of what analyst relations people do. Yeah. If you look at a lot, I mean, when I think of analyst relations agencies that I've worked for, or analyst relations agencies where, I mean, I've had the opportunity, for example, to go to Spotlight Analyst Relations and spend a month in their offices. You know, that, I mean, that is most of what we're doing is not organizing briefings. Most of what we're doing is organizing infrastructure, preparing spokespeople, aligning. So that's most of what we're doing, and I think it's quite significant. Okay, I'm pretty much up on the on the hour. Dan is making the good point that if your top people are becoming experts in their market, basically acting as shadows to the core analysts, right? Then you're freeing up the time of those expert and of those AR experts to be relationship managers. That really that makes sense, doesn't it? You know, it makes sense that you should have a cohort of people who can act as spokespeople to analysts, or to meaningly be participants and discussants with your analysts, and for everything that doesn't require that capability to be done by other people. That really makes sense. But the flip side of that is that in many organizations that don't have that division of labor, many analysts are interacting with AR professionals who cannot meaningfully act as discussants. They can't really go very far into a conversation with an analyst about what's happening in a market, and that is a tragedy. Yeah. Because it limits the number of interactions that you can really have. It just means that all you can do is organize interactions where you've got spokespeople coming in. Yeah. And that is, if you think of these bottlenecks that I've been discussing, it's going to limit your ability to communicate high quality information to analysts, to be open to analysts. Yeah. You need interlocutors, you need discussants, AR professionals who are able to speak at the same level of conversation as the analyst. And how many of those people you really have, how influential the analysts are that you have inside your briefing program, this might be relatively independent from how influential they are. They might be 5% of the influence, they might be 90% of the influence. That is something that you need to quantify. So I think the division of labor between how many people are in that operational digital one-to-many AR and how many people are doing that intensive one-to-one relationship building AR, this is really something that has to flow from the needs of the business and the reality of it. Okay, we're up on the hour. I can see that people are leaving. Thank you so much to everybody who submitted questions in advance. This was super useful and really, really helpful. I can see that there are a few questions in the Q&A. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention. If you need to leave, please leave, right? But I've got nothing else to do at 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna address these other questions that are in the Q&A, and then that means that they will be in the recording. You'll be able to hear them. I see that somebody has even invited Fireflies AI as a note taker into this meeting. I don't know who you are, but please share those notes with me. I'm gonna go through these other questions now, and then they'll be in the recording. What with the challenge of getting access to spokespeople availability, how can you satisfy industry analysts with low-tier analysts? Well, that is with digital AR. Absolutely, that is with that digital AR. The one-to-many AR events are also one-to-many, even if they're not digital. So look more at things like fireside chats, roundtable discussions, events, and proactive outreach by having higher quality AR people who are able to really speak to the problems of the business. Patrick asked me to clarify the methodology. Yeah, no, I'm not speaking about 50 analyst firms. I'm talking about 50 analyst relations teams. So that's what the survey is. The Analyst Advocacy Survey reaches out to a representative sample of all of the analyst industry, not just the top 50 firms. Obviously, most responses come from almost all analysts work for the top 50 analyst firms, right? So most of the analysts are there, but the goal that we have is for a representative study of the analyst industry as a whole. But most analysts are commenting on the 50 largest vendors. And so in the analysis that we have conducted, we've really been focusing on the bottlenecks experienced by the 50 vendors that analysts comment on the most, because that's where we have data sufficiency. Roger asks, what is the makeup of the analysts who make up the survey respondents? So they are a representative sample. So, you know, if Gartner is X percentage of the analysts or X percentage of the analysts that are nominated by our clients to be interviewed, then that will be the participation that they have in the study. So if you imagine that roughly a third of the analysts, maybe a little bit more than a third of the analysts, are working for Gartner, Forrester, and an IDC, that is, you know, that will be the participation of the survey that we do. And then when we're doing data analysis, there are particular analysts that clients care more about. There are particular analysts that you and your competitors communicate with the most. What we will do is segment the data to show over here, these are the analysts that you and your peers are most concerned about, and then these are the other ones. And we talk about those people as being the stars and the experts. So that gives you two parts of the sample, something like a control group, the people who you and your competitors are not really competing with, and then the stars, the people who you are really contending for talk time with. So we segment the results between those. And that shows the difference that is produced between you reaching out a lot and you not reaching out so often. So this gives us both a representative sample and a control group. And that control group allows you to see what is the difference produced by analyst relations. Okay, there are some comments on these questions. Ian has even answered some of these questions in the chat, but at least by my vocalizing them. Ian said the same things that I've said, conveniently. By vocalizing them, that means that they're in the recording and in the transcript. Okay, so free donuts and Starbucks vouchers to those of you who stayed all the way through to the end. I'm very grateful for that. I'm gonna leave now, save the recording somewhere safe, and then share it online. But thank you so much for joining us in this conversation, and apologies again for Ian and his dental emergency could not have been forecast. I hope I've done a good enough job of presenting his ideas today. Again, my email address is dc@sageCircle.com. It's also dc@duncanchapple.com, but dc@sageCircle.com. So if you have follow-up questions or you want to go more into the data for your firm, then please let us know. Okay, thank you so much. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.